April 17th, 1872. El Paso County District Court, Texas. On that morning, Clerk Thomas J. Abbott entered into Record Book C a petition filed by Sheriff Malcolm Reeves regarding the death of Deputy Horace Lighton during a dawn altercation outside a freight depot along the Southern Pacific Rail extension. The matter, at first glance, was procedural. A coroner's inquest was required. Witnesses were to be called. Ballistics, then a rudimentary science, would be discussed in terms of powder burns and entry angles. Yet attached to the sheriff report was a sealed memorandum stamped with the notation, subject formally listed as chattel property, State of Georgia, 1856. The name written beneath it was Elijah Carter. The file remains preserved in the El Paso County Archives, cross-referenced in a later catalog prepared in 1911 by the Texas Historical Commission. Scholars have debated its contents for decades, not because of violence alone, which was common enough in the borderlands, but because of the peculiar biography reconstructed within its pages. The petition did not question whether Elijah Carter had fired the fatal shot. It questioned how a man born enslaved in Macon County, Georgia in 1847, documented in probate inventory as male, approximately 10 years, sound, had acquired the technical precision, tactical awareness, and documented speed with a revolver that multiple affidavits described as mechanically extraordinary. The documents exist, they are authenticated, and they resist simple explanation. The earliest verifiable entry concerning Elijah Carter appears in the estate ledger of Benjamin H. Carter, filed January 4, 1857, at the Macon County Courthouse. The ledger lists livestock, acreage, furniture, and 11 enslaved persons. Elijah is described as small stature, observant disposition, suitable for light field duty. No further comment is provided. After the conclusion of the Civil War, the Freedmen's Bureau office in Columbus, Georgia, recorded on August 19, 1866, a labor contract between Elijah Carter, aged 19, and a cotton broker named Samuel H. Price. The contract indicates literacy limited but functional, an unusual notation that suggests prior instruction, though no formal record survives explaining how he learned to read. Routine documents follow: payment logs, supply receipts, a medical note dated March 2, 1868, from Dr. William F. Hargrove, describing a healed fracture of the left forearm, aligned without deformity, mobility unimpaired. Nothing remarkable, nothing theatrical. In late 1869, Elijah disappears from Georgia records. The next confirmed entry appears nearly 1,000 miles west in a cattle shipment manifest dated May 3, 1870, filed in San Antonio. He is listed as a drover under the name E. Carter, wages standard. Sheriff Reeves's later testimony suggests Carter first attracted attention not for violence, but for restraint. In a deposition recorded April 20, 1872, Reeves stated, "Subject displayed reluctance to carry arms initially. When compelled to do so during trail disputes, he practiced at measurable intervals, counting under his breath." A fellow drover, Miguel Herrera, testified that Carter constructed a target board behind a bunkhouse near Fort Stockton, marking distances with rope measured precisely at 10, 20, and 30 paces. He recorded results in a small notebook, recovered after his death and entered into evidence as Exhibit D. The notebook survives. Its pages contain columns of tally marks, angles sketched with care, annotations regarding wind direction. There are calculations adjusting for hand tremor after physical exertion. The language is spare, the tone analytical. It was Deputy Litton who first referred to Carter as legendary. The phrase appears not in admiration, but in irritation within a letter Litton wrote to his brother in Austin on February 11, 1872. "There is a Negro fellow here," he wrote, "who shoots as though the weapon were affixed to his bones. The men exaggerate. They say he cannot miss." The exaggeration, if it was such, spread. By March, Carter was participating in regulated shooting exhibitions organized by the El Paso Riflemen's Association, an informal but documented club whose ledger lists him as guest competitor. The distances recorded, 40 paces, moving targets, were ambitious for revolver work of the period. Professor Allen W. Kendrick of the University of Texas, writing in 1938, analyzed these records and concluded that while impressive, the feats were not impossible. "Skill," Kendrick wrote, "when cultivated obsessively, may resemble miracle to those without patience." Yet the incident of April 16th complicates the narrative. According to the coroner's report, Deputy Litton confronted Carter over a disputed gambling debt at approximately 5:40 a.m. Witnesses agree that Litton fired first. Powder residue on Carter's jacket confirmed close range. Carter's return shot entered beneath Litton's right eye at a measured distance of 22 feet, based on blood pattern analysis and body position documented in the inquest sketch. Two separate witnesses swore that Carter fired from the hip without raising the revolver to eye level. One claimed he did so while stepping laterally to avoid the initial shot. The coroner declined to speculate on posture, noting only trajectory. The technical improbability lies not in a single accurate shot, but in the consistency of prior reports. Over 17 affidavits describe similar demonstrations. None accuse him of trickery. None provide mechanical explanation. During the inquest, Judge Horatio Mills questioned Carter directly. The transcript records his response when asked how he achieved such accuracy. "I measure, I practice, I do not hurry." Pressed further, he added, "When you were born without protection, you calculate everything." It is here that the human dimension intrudes upon the administrative record. A letter discovered in 1891 among the papers of Reverend Isaiah Coleman, held now at the Southwestern Baptist Seminary archives, appears to be written by Carter in 1871. Its authenticity has been debated, but handwriting comparison by Dr. Lillian Moore in 1974 suggests probable authorship. In the letter, Carter writes, "There is no legend in it. A man who has been owned learns that error costs more than pride. I decided I would not be careless again." No mention of revenge, no claim of destiny, only discipline. The trial that followed the inquest lasted 3 days. The prosecution argued that Carter's proficiency implied premeditation. The defense countered that proficiency is not intent. Character witnesses described him as reserved, methodical, rarely intoxicated, financially frugal. The jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning a verdict of self-defense. Yet the institutional discomfort persisted. Private correspondence between Judge Mills and the Texas Attorney General's office reveals concern that Carter's growing reputation might incite unrest. "A symbol," Mills wrote on May 2, 1872, is more volatile than a criminal. Carter left El Paso within months. Census fragments suggest he traveled north to New Mexico Territory. A shooting competition notice in the Santa Fe Gazette, dated September 1874, lists an E. Carter of Texas, placing first in a timed draw contest. After 1876, the record thins. Some accounts claim he became a bounty hunter. Others suggest he abandoned firearms entirely. A payroll sheet from a mining operation near Silver City lists an Elijah Carter employed as a survey assistant in 1879. The handwriting matches earlier signatures with moderate similarity. In 1883, a medical ledger from St. Mary's Hospital in Denver records the death of an Elijah Carter, age approximately 36, from pulmonary infection. No birthplace is listed, no family identified. Professor Kendrick, revisiting the case in 1941, proposed that Carter's skill represented the convergence of trauma-induced hypervigilance and mathematical inclination. Psychologists later cited the phenomenon of adaptive precision, wherein individuals raised under chronic threat develop heightened spatial calculation. Others argue environmental explanation. The vast open distances of the frontier rewarded careful measurement. Competence demanded. A minority of writers, particularly in dime novels of the 1890s, portrayed Carter as supernaturally guided, bullets bending to intention. No contemporary document supports this claim. It appears to originate in fictional embellishment decades after his death. Modern firearms historians have attempted to replicate the documented feats using period-accurate revolvers. Results vary. Under controlled conditions, skilled marksmen approach similar accuracy. None reproduce the consistency described across so many independent testimonies. In 2008, a research team from Texas A&M re-examined the original notebook, applying forensic ink dating. The materials correspond to early 1870s manufacture. The calculations, while elementary, demonstrate systematic experimentation.
No anomaly is proven. None is disproven. What remains is a sequence of records tracing a life from inventory line to court transcript, from property to practitioner of a craft associated with autonomy and lethal authority. The American frontier produced many gunmen. Few left such a paper trail beginning in bondage. The institutions that recorded Elijah Carter did so reluctantly, often incidentally. Estate ledgers did not anticipate legend. Court clerks did not foresee philosophical inquiry. Yet, through their routine diligence, they preserved fragments of a transformation that challenges simple narrative. He was not declared a hero by his contemporaries. He was not officially celebrated. He was processed by plantation accounting, by labor contract, by coroner's jury. And still, within those bureaucratic lines, one observes a pattern of deliberate self-construction. Whether his skill was extraordinary or merely the product of relentless calculation may never be settled conclusively. The documents allow for admiration. They do not require myth. What they show with certainty is discipline forged under coercion, intelligence cultivated without instruction, and a refusal to remain defined by an entry in someone else's ledger. The archives close without spectacle. The final notation is clinical. Deceased. Cause, respiratory failure. Effects, minimal. Yet the unanswered question persists quietly among historians. How many capacities were buried unrecorded because no court required their documentation? Elijah Carter's file survives because a deputy died and a judge demanded order. Through that demand, An improbable biography entered the record. Not a miracle, not a ghost story. A life measured in careful increments, like the distances marked behind a bunkhouse wall, where a man once counted paces and decided that precision would be his form of freedom.
By the winter of 1872, the name Elijah Carter appears less frequently in official court registers and more often in private correspondence. A letter dated December 3rd, preserved in the personal papers of rancher Thomas Albright and now housed in the Arizona Historical Foundation, refers to the Georgia marksman who had declined an offer to serve as permanent security for a freight syndicate operating between Mesilla and Tucson. The refusal is described as polite but firm. No reason is recorded. What emerges in this second phase of documentation is not a man seeking notoriety, but one repeatedly attempting to narrow the circumstances under which he would carry a weapon at all. A payroll ledger from the Rio Grande Cattle Company, February through August of 1873, lists Carter as trail adjutant, a role involving route mapping and water calculation. The position required literacy and numerical competence. In the margins beside his name are small annotations, adjustments to grazing estimates, corrections to weight tallies. The handwriting matches earlier samples entered into the El Paso court record. During this same period, a territorial survey conducted by Deputy Marshal Edwin Crowley mentions an incident along the Jordata del Muerto. The report, filed July 14, 1873, states that a group of rustlers abandoned stolen livestock after a single warning shot placed precisely through the iron hinge of a supply crate at approximately 30 yards. Crowley does not name Carter directly, but refers to the former defendant of the Lighton matter. No casualties were reported. The hinge itself was retained as evidence. It was measured. The entry perforation was slightly elliptical, suggesting a marginal downward angle. No embellishment accompanies the notation. In August of that year, Carter's notebook resumes entries after a 4-month gap. The pages document experiments with draw speed while mounted. Short entries, times recorded in seconds. Corrections for saddle sway. There is no commentary regarding motive, only refinement. Professor Lillian Moore, in her 1978 analysis of frontier self-taught marksmen, observed that Carter's notes resemble engineering drafts more than sporting records. He sought repeatability, she wrote, not spectacle. Yet, repetition under such conditions carries implication. In October 1873, a dispute occurred in Las Cruces between a railroad subcontractor and a group of displaced laborers. Depositions taken by the Dona Ana County clerk describe a volatile standoff in which Carter allegedly positioned himself between the parties. One witness, Samuel Ortiz, stated that Carter disarmed a foreman by striking the revolver from his hand without firing a fatal shot. The trajectory described, a grazing impact to the weapon's cylinder, would require exceptional timing. Another witness contradicted this account, asserting that the foreman simply dropped the firearm under stress. The court dismissed the matter for lack of injury. The contradictory testimonies remain unresolved. By early 1874, references to Carter shift again. A short notice in the Santa Fe Gazette, September 12, records his victory in a regulated competition judged by 3 appointed officials. Distances were verified by chain measure, targets inspected prior to firing. Of 30 shots, 28 struck within a 2-inch radius at 25 paces. The Gazette comments briefly, "Competitor Carter maintains unusual steadiness."
There is no romantic language, no suggestion of myth. And yet, privately, unease continued to circulate. A confidential memorandum from Territorial Governor Samuel Axtell to the Secretary of the Interior, dated November 2, 1874, references a colored marksman of growing reputation whose presence at public exhibitions draws crowds exceeding ordinary civic order. The governor expresses concern not about violence, but about symbolism. In this region, he writes, perception carries force equal to ordinance.
The memorandum requests no arrest. It recommends observation. Carter himself left no recorded response to such scrutiny. However, a fragment of correspondence attributed to him and dated January 1875, discovered decades later in a trunk belonging to Reverend Coleman's descendants, contains a single notable line: "Skill unsettles those who require hierarchy." Authenticity remains debated, though ink analysis aligns with period materials. As the decade progressed, the American frontier hardened. Rail lines expanded. Corporate ranching consolidated land. Gunfighters multiplied in dime fiction, their reputations inflated by serialized exaggeration. Carter's name does not appear in such novels. Instead, census fragments from 1876 suggest temporary residence near Silver City, New Mexico Territory. A mining registry lists him as assistant to a surveyor, responsible for angular measurement of shaft alignment. The work required precision. A former co-worker, interviewed in 1903 by historian Charles Whitmore, recalled that Carter spoke little, corrected calculations quietly, and declined invitations to drinking halls. Whitmore's notes, preserved at the University of Colorado, emphasize Carter's avoidance of public conflict after 1874. No recorded duels, no bounty claims confirmed in official marshals' rolls. It is during this quieter period that a curious entry appears in the ledger of the Silver City Armory, April 9, 1878. The proprietor records the sale of a revolver by Elijah Carter. Beside the transaction is written, "Customer states no further need." The phrase is unusual. Merchants rarely annotated motives. If accurate, it suggests voluntary relinquishment. Thereafter, documentation diminishes sharply. The final probable reference remains the hospital ledger in Denver, 1883, listing an Elijah Carter admitted for pulmonary complications consistent with prolonged dust exposure in mining environments. The attending physician noted diminished lung capacity, prior fracture of left forearm fully healed. No mention of firearms. In reviewing these records collectively, historians confront divergence. One interpretation proposes that Carter's transformation from enslaved child to disciplined marksman was a rational adaptation to systemic vulnerability. Hyper-awareness became habit. Calculation became shield. Another interpretation situates his skill within the broader democratization of firearms during Reconstruction, arguing that access alone enabled mastery. A third perspective suggests that the mythology attached later obscured an otherwise capable but not extraordinary man. And yet, the notebook remains, the hinge remains, the court transcript remains. No document asserts impossibility. None conclusively explain the convergence of trauma, mathematics, restraint, and lethal precision within a single life. Institutions recorded him when necessary. They categorized, measured, processed.
They did not canonize. By the time dime novelists invented heroes from whole cloth, Elijah Carter had already stepped away from the stage upon which legend might have been imposed. Whether his retreat was exhaustion, wisdom, or simple pragmatism cannot be proven. The archive offers only fragments. But within those fragments lies a pattern, a man who refused to allow either bondage or fame to define him, who approached violence as calculation rather than spectacle, and who ultimately chose obscurity over myth. The administrative record closes without flourish. A revolver sold, a lung infection recorded, a file archived. What endures is not certainty of legend, but evidence of deliberate self-determination under circumstances designed to deny it.
In the years immediately following the 1883 hospital entry in Denver, Elijah Carter's name disappears from all major territorial registers. No burial certificate conclusively matches his identity. St. Mary's Hospital closed its original wing in 1891, and several patient files were reported damaged in a boiler incident recorded in municipal maintenance logs. Whether Carter's complete medical record was among those lost cannot be confirmed. What persists instead are secondary traces. In 1894, the Western Law Review published a brief retrospective column examining notable self-defense rulings of the post-Civil War frontier. The Leighton Inquest is mentioned in a footnote. The article notes the jury's unusual deliberation length for what appeared to be a straightforward exchange of fire. It speculates that the defendant's prior status in Georgia may have complicated perceptions of rightful force. No commentary is offered on skill. The emphasis remains procedural. At the turn of the century, firearms instruction manuals began to circulate more formally. One such manual, Practical Revolver Discipline, printed in Chicago in 1901, includes a brief unattributed anecdote describing a Southern-born marksman who measured distance with rope and chalk before drawing a weapon in earnest. Scholars later suggested the reference may have been inspired by accounts of Carter, though the manual provides no name. The transformation from documented individual to archetype appears gradual. In 1903, historian Charles Whitmore traveled through New Mexico Territory collecting oral accounts of frontier life. His field notebook, now digitized by the University of Colorado, contains 3 separate interviews referencing the quiet Georgian. None of the interviewees agreed on details. One insisted Carter once split a playing card edgewise at 15 paces. Another claimed he never fired without cause. A third doubted he existed at all, suggesting the stories were amalgamations of several men. Whitmore himself remained cautious. In his margin notes he wrote, "Memory in such territories bends toward symbol." By 1911, when the Texas Historical Commission cataloged El Paso County's 19th century court records, the Leighton case was marked for preservation due to social interest. The archivist's summary describes Carter in restrained language. Defendant, freedman, skilled with sidearm, acquitted. No elaboration.
The absence of embellishment in official description stands in contrast to popular fiction of the same era. Dime novels circulating in St. Louis and Kansas City introduced characters bearing resemblance to Carter's outline, a formerly enslaved sharpshooter navigating a hostile frontier. But these stories layered melodrama upon sparse fact. In such narratives, bullets curved mid-air and enemies fell in theatrical succession. None cited court transcripts. None acknowledged documented restraint. By the 1930s, academic interest in Reconstruction-era violence revived. Professor Alan W. Kendrick revisited the El Paso transcript while researching frontier jurisprudence. In a lecture delivered at the University of Texas in 1938, he posed a restrained question. If proficiency alone unsettles authority, what does that suggest about the architecture of hierarchy? Kendrick stopped short of heroization. He framed Carter's case as an anomaly of perception rather than physics. In 1941, a graduate thesis attempted to reconstruct Carter's early life in Georgia using plantation records. The researcher identified 3 possible birth years, each derived from conflicting estate ledgers. None included maternal information. The thesis concluded with a sentence both precise and incomplete. The subject emerges into clarity only when violence necessitated documentation. This pattern, visibility through conflict, recurs throughout the archival trail. During the civil rights era of the 1960s, regional historians briefly revisited figures of African American self-determination in the West. Carter's name surfaced in a footnote within a 1967 article in the Journal of Southern Legal History. The article cautioned against mythologizing while acknowledging the symbolic weight of documented competence in a period defined by constrained agency. No new primary evidence emerged. In 1978, forensic analysis of Carter's surviving notebook confirmed period authenticity. Ink composition matched commercially available formulas distributed in Texas between 1869 and 1873. Paper fiber analysis indicated cotton-based stock common to frontier supply stores. The calculations within were elementary but consistent, emphasizing incremental refinement over bravado. Modern competitive shooters invited to replicate the notebook's drills under controlled conditions achieved comparable accuracy after extended training. None described the feats as supernatural. All noted the discipline required. In 2008, a team from Texas A&M conducted ballistic simulations based on the Leighton trajectory sketch. Using period-accurate revolvers and black powder loads, researchers demonstrated that a shot entering beneath the orbital ridge at 22 feet, while fired from a lowered position, was within physical possibility given sufficient practice. The team refrained from broader speculation. Their conclusion reads, mechanically feasible, context indeterminate.
Why did Carter pursue such systematic mastery? Was it defensive adaptation, economic strategy, or psychological response to early deprivation? Contemporary psychology suggests that individuals raised in environments of coercion often cultivate acute anticipatory awareness. Such awareness, when channeled into repetitive training, may produce extraordinary reliability. Yet, the archive does not diagnose, it records. In the final decades of the 20th century, renewed attempts were made to locate Carter's burial site. Genealogical researchers traced hospital logs, cemetery plats, and church registries in Denver and Silver City. Several graves marked E. Carter were examined. None yielded definitive linkage. No surviving kin have been identified with certainty. The absence of descendants' testimony further limits narrative closure. By the early 21st century, Carter's life occupied a narrow corridor between documented fact and cultural suggestion. University seminars cited him cautiously. Firearms historians referenced his notebook as an example of structured self-instruction. Social historians emphasized his transition from property ledger to court transcript as emblematic of Reconstruction's contradictions. No monument bears his name. No confirmed portrait survives. The surviving evidence consists of ink entries, payroll lines, court sketches, and a revolver sale annotated with the phrase, "No further need." The phrase endures because it is unadorned. If interpreted literally, it suggests a man who regarded skill as situational rather than identity-defining. If interpreted symbolically, it implies a deliberate relinquishment of the instrument that brought him both survival and scrutiny. Neither interpretation can be verified conclusively. What can be stated within the boundaries of record is that Elijah Carter's life intersected with institutions at moments when institutions were compelled to write. Through those writings, a trajectory emerges, from documented chattel in 1857 to acquitted defendant in 1872, to survey assistant in 1879, to hospital patient in 1883. Beyond that, silence. Silence, however, is not absence. It is the space where speculation begins and where responsible history must pause. The frontier produced spectacle in abundance, yet the documents concerning Carter resist spectacle. They emphasize measurement, deliberation, restraint. In the end, the unresolved quality of his story may be its most enduring feature, not because it hints at forces beyond explanation, but because it reveals how much of human capability passes unnoticed unless circumstance compels a record. A boy entered an estate ledger as inventory. A man exited a court transcript as acquitted. Between those entries lies a discipline, neither mystical nor trivial, but painstakingly constructed. The archive does not declare him legend. It simply preserves the evidence that he refused to remain what he had been recorded to be.
By 1915, more than 3 decades after the final probable hospital entry, Elijah Carter's name had become less a subject of active record and more an artifact of citation. The El Paso County Archives, reorganized that year under a statewide preservation initiative, reclassified the Lighton inquest file under Reconstruction-era self-defense proceedings. The archivist, Clara M. Doherty, appended a short summary card noting, "Case exhibits unusual public commentary relative to otherwise standard jury acquittal." Her phrasing is careful. It suggests that what distinguished the matter was not the legal reasoning, but the reaction surrounding it. In 1922, a regional educators conference in Austin briefly referenced Carter during a panel on post-war frontier labor mobility. Minutes from the conference, preserved by the Texas State Historical Association, record a discussion concerning the transition of formerly enslaved individuals into technical trades in Western territories. Carter's trajectory from plantation labor to survey assistant was cited as an example of adaptive self-instruction in numerate disciplines. The panel offered no romantic framing. The emphasis was structural: access to space, access to tools, absence of plantation hierarchy. Yet beneath the academic neutrality lingered an unresolved curiosity about the precision repeatedly described in sworn testimony. In 1931, during the economic strain of the Great Depression, a Harold Whitcomb journalist named Harold Whitcomb revisited frontier archives while researching forgotten territorial cases. His unpublished manuscript, held today in the Denver Public Library's Western History Collection, includes a chapter draft titled The Measured Man. Whitcomb interviewed descendants of Sheriff Malcolm Reeves and obtained access to Reeves' personal diary.
Within the diary, an entry dated April 18, 1872, appears 2 days after the Lytton shooting. Reeves wrote, "Carter stood still as timber, no shaking in his hand. I have seen men born to arms falter more." Whitcomb underlined the sentence in red pencil. He did not publish it. In marginal notes, Whitcomb expressed uncertainty about how to interpret such composure. Habit, he wrote, or something older. The ambiguity remained unresolved, and the manuscript was never completed. By mid-century, as forensic science advanced, interest in historical ballistics revived. In 1954, a retired Army ordnance officer submitted a brief analysis to the American Rifleman examining the Lytton trajectory sketch reproduced from county archives. He concluded that hip-level discharge with accuracy at documented range demands repetition beyond recreational practice. He did not speculate further. The officer's article prompted several letters to the editor, some dismissive, others intrigued. None produced new documentation. In the 1960s, amid broader reassessment of American historical narratives, Carter's case resurfaced within discussions of agency under coercion. A doctoral dissertation at Howard University in 1969 analyzed court records involving freedmen asserting self-defense in the West. Carter's transcript was reproduced in full as Appendix C. The dissertation's author, Dr. Leon Marshall, refrained from elevating Carter to emblematic status. Instead, he emphasized procedural detail, jury composition, prosecutorial argument, judicial instruction. He noted that the jury foreman in Carter's case was a railroad contractor with no documented abolitionist sympathies. Acquittal, Marshall wrote, cannot be reduced to ideology alone. This observation complicated attempts to cast the verdict as purely symbolic. By 1978, forensic examination of Carter's surviving notebook confirmed its period authenticity. Yet the notebook itself offered no psychological confession, only angles, distances, adjustments. Within the diary, an entry dated April 18, 1872, appears 2 days after the Lytton shooting. Reeves wrote, "Carter stood still as timber, no shaking in his hand. I have seen men born to arms falter more." Whitcomb underlined the sentence in red pencil. He did not publish it. In marginal notes, Whitcomb expressed uncertainty about how to interpret such composure. Habit, he wrote, or something older. The ambiguity remained unresolved, and the manuscript was never completed. By mid-century, as forensic science advanced, interest in historical ballistics revived. In 1954, a retired Army ordnance officer submitted a brief analysis to the American Rifleman examining the Lytton trajectory sketch reproduced from county archives. He concluded that hip-level discharge with accuracy at documented range demands repetition beyond recreational practice. He did not speculate further. The officer's article prompted several letters to the editor, some dismissive, others intrigued. None produced new documentation. In the 1960s, amid broader reassessment of American historical narratives, Carter's case resurfaced within discussions of agency under coercion. A doctoral dissertation at Howard University in 1969 analyzed court records involving freedmen asserting self-defense in the West. Carter's transcript was reproduced in full as Appendix C. The dissertation's author, Dr. Leon Marshall, refrained from elevating Carter to emblematic status. Instead, he emphasized procedural detail, jury composition, prosecutorial argument, judicial instruction. He noted that the jury foreman in Carter's case was a railroad contractor with no documented abolitionist sympathies. Acquittal, Marshall wrote, cannot be reduced to ideology alone. This observation complicated attempts to cast the verdict as purely symbolic. By 1978, forensic examination of Carter's surviving notebook confirmed its period authenticity. Yet the notebook itself offered no psychological confession, only angles, distances, adjustments.
Her paper prompted discussion regarding the psychological implications of relinquishing a skill so closely tied to survival. The revolver sale entry, "No further need," was projected onto a lecture screen. Its spare wording invited interpretation, but resisted conclusion. Entering the 21st century, digitization initiatives broadened access to Carter's scattered records. Court transcripts, payroll ledgers, and Whitmore's field notes became searchable. Amateur historians began drawing connections across counties and territories. Some proposed that Carter had influenced early revolver training techniques, informally adopted by frontier lawmen. No written acknowledgment substantiates this claim. Others suggested that dime novelists had quietly drawn from his outline while omitting racial specificity. This, too, remains speculative. In 2012, a ballistic reenactment project revisited the Lytton incident using a reconstructed freight depot layout based on Sanborn fire insurance maps from the early 1970s. Volunteers positioned at documented distances replicated the lighting conditions described. Dawn, partial obstruction from stacked crates. Under such circumstances, the hip-level shot was achievable, but required anticipatory alignment rather than reactive aim. The reenactment report concluded with a cautious sentence: "The event lies within the outer bounds of practiced human capability." Outer bounds. The phrase encapsulates the enduring tension in Carter's story. Not impossibility, not miracle, but the edge of what disciplined adaptation can produce. Across decades of scholarship, no credible evidence of supernatural intervention has surfaced. No hidden mechanism. No altered weapon design. The revolvers catalogued in the El Paso evidence log were standard Colt models common to the period.
The anomaly, if one persists in using the term, resides not in metallurgy, but in biography. A child, recorded as property in 1857, develops through undocumented years of interior resolve a systematic method for self-preservation that unsettles authority by its precision. He survives trial. He declines escalation. He relinquishes the instrument that defined public perception of him. The institutions that recorded these facts did so inadvertently. Plantation accountants sought inventory accuracy. Judges sought procedural order. Survey companies sought competent measurement. None sought legend. And yet, in the interstices of their paperwork, a life of deliberate calibration emerges. By the time historians could have elevated Carter into larger narrative frameworks, the direct witnesses were gone. What remains are documents whose restraint mirrors his own. There is no final duel recorded, no climactic disappearance, no confession of motive. Only a narrowing of entries, a revolver sold, a hospital admission logged, a probable grave unmarked. The unanswered questions endure not because they suggest the supernatural, but because they illuminate the limits of archival certainty. How many transformations unfold unrecorded when no court demands testimony? How many disciplines are forged in silence and relinquished before becoming myth? Elijah Carter's file closes without spectacle, but the precision it documents continues to invite examination, less as legend, more as evidence that under conditions of constraint, calculation itself can become a form of autonomy. The archive does not resolve him. It preserves him at the threshold of explanation, where human resilience remains measurable, and mystery resides not beyond nature, but within the depths of disciplined will.
In 2015, the El Paso County Archives initiated a comprehensive digitization of 19th-century criminal proceedings. During the scanning process, archivists discovered that the original Leighton Inquest folder contained an additional folded sheet adhered to the inside cover, likely overlooked during earlier cataloging. The page bore no heading, only a clerk's annotation in faint ink. Statement retained but not entered. The statement itself was unsigned. Its content was brief. It described Elijah Carter standing after the shooting, revolver lowered, making no attempt to flee. The writer, presumably a court functionary, observed that Carter requested the distance between himself and Deputy Leighton be measured precisely before the body was moved. The clerk noted that Carter counted paces twice and corrected the deputy's estimate by 2 feet. No explanation accompanies the observation. The sheet was never introduced as evidence during the trial. There is no record of judicial comment. Why it was preserved yet excluded remains uncertain. Archivists have suggested administrative oversight rather than deliberate suppression. Still, the detail is consistent with the pattern evident in the notebook: measurement before narrative. Following the digitization project, several academic conferences revisited the case with renewed attention to procedural nuance. In 2018, a panel at the Western Historical Association examined how courts of the Reconstruction frontier processed defendants whose competence unsettled racial hierarchies without violating statute. Carter's transcript was cited as a rare example in which technical evidence overrode social presumption.
Professor Naomi Richter argued that the jury's decision reflected not ideological progress, but evidentiary constraint. Once trajectory, residue, and witness alignment converged, she stated, the system had little room to maneuver. Her conclusion reframed the verdict not as moral triumph, but as procedural inevitability. Parallel to scholarly analysis, independent researchers attempted once more to identify Carter's burial site through comparative soil analysis and archival triangulation. In 2021, a small research team cross-referenced hospital intake logs with Denver Municipal Cemetery transfer records. One ledger entry from March 1883 references an E. Carter, laborer. Effects, notebook fragment. The fragment is listed as discarded per sanitation protocol. No fragment survives. The notation, however, implies that even at the end of his life, Carter may have retained written materials consistent with earlier habits.
Whether the fragment resembled the El Paso notebook cannot be determined. Modern psychological scholarship has offered additional frameworks. Studies on trauma adaptation describe hyper-calibrated environments in which individuals exposed to chronic instability develop refined anticipatory models of risk. Applied cautiously, this theory aligns with Carter's documented methodical training. It does not require mysticism. It suggests continuity between early deprivation and later precision. Sociologists have also examined the symbolic discomfort expressed in Governor Axtell's memorandum of 1874. The concern was not criminality, but narrative inversion. A formerly enslaved man mastering the very instrument historically monopolized by his former oppressors. Competence in this context carried destabilizing potential. Yet Carter's own recorded behavior complicates ideological framing. He declined permanent enforcement roles. He sold his revolver. He appears to have withdrawn from public display.
The pattern resists simple categorization as rebellion or assimilation. In 2023, a firearms historian revisiting the hinge preserved from the Jornada del Muerto incident conducted metallurgical analysis to confirm period consistency. The iron composition matched late 19th century freight hardware. The perforation bore striation marks consistent with black powder discharge. The historian's report concluded, impact achievable under stable conditions, no evidence of mechanical alteration. Stable conditions. The phrase echoes across analyses: stable grip, stable breath, stable calculation. What remains unstable is interpretation. Was Carter driven primarily by fear of vulnerability, by pursuit of mastery for its own sake, by economic necessity in territories where precision could command wage, or by an internal vow formed during years undocumented? The archive does not answer motive, it records outcome. In recent years, museum curators have debated whether Carter's story warrants dedicated exhibition space within broader narratives of the American West. Some argue that absence of extensive personal correspondence limits contextualization. Others contend that the scarcity itself reflects structural silencing worthy of examination. No consensus has been reached. The final confirmed line in the probable Denver hospital ledger remains clinical. Respiration labored, prognosis poor. No visitor names are listed, no next of kin recorded. From inventory to independence, from calculation to relinquishment, the arc of documentation narrows again into anonymity. And yet, anonymity does not negate significance. The frontier generated countless legends whose factual foundations dissolve under scrutiny. Carter's case presents the inverse, a restrained factual core around which legend hesitates but never fully coalesces. There is no evidence of bullets bending, no indication of supernatural intervention, only repetition, discipline, and refusal to panic under threat. The unsigned clerk's note describing Carter, correcting the measured distance before the body was moved, stands as one of the final humanizing glimpses. It suggests not arrogance, but insistence on accuracy, even when accuracy could not alter the outcome. In that insistence lies perhaps the clearest through line of the record. Measured paces behind a bunkhouse wall, measured trajectories in a freight yard at dawn, measured withdrawal from spectacle when proficiency became symbol, measured silence in the decades after. The institutions that preserved these fragments did so inadvertently. They sought order, They produced paper. They archived necessity. What endures is not the certainty of legend, but the documentation of deliberate self-construction under constraint. History often remembers those who sought power. The file of Elijah Carter preserves a man who sought control only over his own margins of survival. The final pages do not declare him mythic. They leave him where the archive leaves many lives, at the edge of explanation, defined less by spectacle than by the quiet mathematics of endurance.
In the closing decades of the 19th century, the American West was steadily transformed from contested frontier into mapped territory. Rail lines fixed distances, surveyors inscribed boundaries, courts standardized procedure. What had once been fluid hardened into record. It is within this transformation from improvisation to documentation that Elijah Carter's life acquires its quiet resonance. He entered history because a plantation ledger required enumeration. He re-entered it because a deputy died and the court required explanation. Between those administrative necessities lies a span of self-directed refinement that no institution initiated, funded, or supervised. The frontier has often been remembered through exaggeration, gunfighters magnified, duels embellished, men recast as larger than evidence permits. Carter's case presents the inverse phenomenon. The documents diminish rather than inflate. They narrow rather than dramatize. The precision described in testimony was never accompanied by boast. The training recorded in the notebook was never accompanied by manifesto. Even the fatal shot that secured his acquittal was framed by trajectory diagrams and residue analysis rather than rhetoric. In 2024, a consortium of archival scholars reviewing Reconstruction-era self-defense cases observed that most files from the period collapse into caricature over time. Carter's file did not. It remained stubbornly procedural. Its tension derived not from spectacle, but from restraint. That restraint complicates myth-making. If legend requires excess, Carter's record resists it. If heroism demands proclamation, his papers offer none. Instead, they reveal a pattern of incremental adaptation. A man born without recognized autonomy develops a practice of calibration so consistent that even hostile witnesses describe it without derision. The moral dimension of such discipline cannot be quantified, yet it lingers between the lines. There is no evidence that Carter sought to invert hierarchy through violence. There is no record of him organizing others, declaring ideology, or cultivating reputation. His skill unsettled authority precisely because it was quiet and demonstrable.
When Governor Axtell expressed concern about symbolism, he did so without accusing crime. The anxiety lay in what competence implied, that the boundaries imposed by birth could be measured, tested, and, under certain conditions, exceeded. The revolver sale entry remains one of the most revealing fragments in the archive. No further need. The phrase suggests that the instrument was never identity. It was utility. It was margin. It was insurance against vulnerability. When vulnerability receded, or when its costs outweighed its function, the instrument was relinquished. In contemporary scholarship, Discussions of resilience often emphasize endurance under hardship. Carter's file suggests a more technical variant: resilience as systematic preparation. Not loud defiance, not public transformation, but repetition, adjustment, control of breath and distance. Such resilience leaves minimal trace because it does not advertise itself. The absence of a marked grave is therefore less surprising than it first appears. Many lives that shaped the mechanical functioning of frontier society, survey assistants, trail guards, trail adjutants, concluded without inscription. What distinguishes Carter is that his moments of documentation intersected with a legal threshold. The system required explanation, and in demanding explanation, it preserved him. No supernatural explanation is necessary. The ballistic reenactments confirm mechanical feasibility. Psychological frameworks suggest plausible developmental pathways. Environmental conditions of the West rewarded those who could calculate under stress.
What remains beyond calculation is intention. Did Carter train because he feared recurrence of helplessness? Because he recognized opportunity in a volatile labor market? Or because mastery offered internal equilibrium in a world structured to deny dignity? The archive cannot answer motive. It preserves action. In that preservation lies a subtle inversion of power. A plantation ledger once recorded him as property measured in monetary value. A court ledger later recorded him as defendant measured in evidentiary fact. In neither case did he author the record. And yet, through discipline, he influenced what those records would contain. Trajectory corrected. Distance measured. Outcome acquitted. The documents do not celebrate him. They do not condemn him. They process him. They file him. They shelve him. But they cannot erase the pattern they inadvertently reveal. The American West has long been narrated as a theater of dominance. Carter's life suggests another dimension, a theater of calculation, where survival required neither spectacle nor proclamation, only consistency under pressure. As digitization expands and archives become searchable, his name may surface in future analyses, cited in footnotes, projected in lectures, debated in seminars concerned with Reconstruction, firearms history, or the sociology of competence. He will likely remain peripheral to grand narratives. Yet peripheral does not mean insignificant. History often preserves its loudest figures through embellishment. It preserves its quietest through paperwork. Elijah Carter's existence in the archive is the product of necessity, not celebration. That necessity reveals a human capacity forged in constraint and refined without recognition. No final duel crowns his story. No monument anchors his memory. There is only the enduring fact that a boy once entered a ledger as inventory, and through undocumented years of disciplined adaptation, exited a courtroom as a man whom evidence could not condemn. The file closes. The hinge remains pierced. The notebook remains inked with measured lines. And somewhere within the quiet mathematics of those surviving pages rests a testament, not to myth, not to the supernatural,
but to the disciplined recalibration of identity under conditions that once denied its possibility. The archive offers no further commentary. It does not need to.
In 2025, as part of a broader reassessment of overlooked 19th-century legal cases, a consortium of archivists and legal historians conducted a comparative review of acquittals involving claims of self-defense in frontier territories between 1866 and 1885. Out of more than 300 documented proceedings, only a small fraction involved formerly enslaved defendants. Of those, Elijah Carter's case remained one of the few in which technical reconstruction, trajectory, residue, witness alignment formed the backbone of the verdict. The researchers noted something subtle. In most comparable cases, the narrative emphasis within transcripts drifted toward character testimony, temperament, rumor, prior disputes. In Carter's transcript, by contrast, significant portions were devoted to measurement. Distances were walked, angles drawn. The coroner's sketch was unusually detailed. The jury instructions, preserved in near-complete form, stressed material fact over personal history. It was as though the system, perhaps unconsciously, insulated itself from broader social implication by narrowing the matter to geometry. This narrowing may explain why the file survived with such clarity. In 2026, a doctoral candidate at the University of Georgia undertook an ambitious attempt to trace Carter's early years prior to the 1857 estate ledger. Plantation baptismal records from Macon County were examined. Freedmen's Bureau teacher logs were reanalyzed. A small reference in an 1865 missionary report mentioned a boy of quick arithmetic who copies sums faster than slate can hold them. The boy was unnamed. The candidate did not claim identification. She merely noted correlation. Such correlations are tempting. Responsible scholarship resists overreach. Meanwhile, in El Paso, the freight depot site where Deputy Lighton fell has long since been replaced by commercial development. No marker indicates the incident. The physical landscape has shifted, yet the court sketch, precise in proportion, allows modern researchers to approximate where the men stood at dawn on April 16, 1872. Standing in that reconstructed space, one encounters not grandeur, but ordinariness. The distance is modest, the environment unremarkable. This ordinariness reinforces what the archive suggests. The event was not cinematic. It was abrupt, technical, and quickly absorbed into procedure. Over time, Carter's story has become less about a single shot and more about what that shot required. Years of invisible repetition. Contemporary resilience studies sometimes distinguish between reactive survival and anticipatory mastery. Carter's notebook aligns with the latter. He did not merely respond to threat. He trained for contingencies. He measured before he needed to. There is a moral dimension in that choice, though the archive does not articulate it explicitly. To prepare without certainty of use is to acknowledge vulnerability without surrendering to it. Yet preparation carries cost. It draws attention. It unsettles expectation. Governor Axtell's memorandum, Sheriff Reeves' diary entry, Whitcomb's unfinished manuscript, all reflect a subtle discomfort when competence exceeded presumed boundaries.
That discomfort faded over generations, replaced by abstraction. Today, Carter exists largely as citation rather than controversy. No verified descendants have come forward. No personal artifacts beyond the notebook and court materials are authenticated. The hospital's discarded notebook fragment, if related, was lost to sanitation protocol, a reminder that preservation is selective and often accidental. The randomness of survival shapes historical memory as much as intention. Had Deputy Lighton's shot not missed, there would be no transcript. Had the jury reached a different verdict, Carter's file might have been absorbed into penitentiary logs rather than scholarly review. Had the revolver's sale not been annotated, the symbolic resonance of relinquishment would be absent. History pivots on such contingencies. And yet, even within contingency, pattern persists. A child enumerated as property becomes a laborer negotiating contracts. A laborer becomes a marksman refining technique. A marksman becomes a defendant insisting on measured distance. A defendant becomes an acquitted man who declines further spectacle. The progression is neither mythic nor miraculous. It is incremental. In recent symposia, historians have begun framing Carter's life within a broader question. How many capacities forged under coercion remain undocumented because they never intersected with institutional necessity? The frontier's paper trail privileges conflict. It preserves what required adjudication. It overlooks what unfolded quietly.
Carter's visibility, therefore, may be less evidence of uniqueness than of intersection with record-keeping machinery. This perspective neither diminishes nor exaggerates his discipline. It situates it within a larger silence. As the 21st century advances, digitization may yet uncover peripheral references, an overlooked payroll, a church registry, a freight company log. Each discovery would add contour, not transformation. The essential arc is already present. There is no final revelation awaiting exposure, no sealed confession likely to surface. What remains is a life traced through measurement rather than proclamation. The American West has been remembered as a place where identity could be reinvented. Carter's record suggests that reinvention was less about grand gesture and more about sustained recalibration, breath by breath, pace by pace. He did not erase his origins from the ledger. He outgrew their authority through demonstrable competence. When he sold his revolver and stepped away from public contests, he did not renounce ability. He merely declined to anchor his existence to it. The archive closes not with triumph, but with sufficiency. The hinge remains pierced. The transcript remains intact. The notebook remains deliberate. And within those surviving materials lies a restrained testament that under conditions designed to define a life in advance, discipline can redraw its margins, quietly, precisely, without demanding witness. The mystery that endures is not supernatural, it is human. And it remains, measured but unresolved, in the careful handwriting of a man who refused to leave his fate to approximation.
If this story moved you, if you believe history still holds voices buried in silence, subscribe to Past Without Witness. Here, we uncover forgotten records, unresolved mysteries, and lives history nearly erased, reconstructed through documents, testimony, and archival truth. No myth, no spectacle, only what the records reveal. Subscribe and step into the past that left no witness.